Good afternoon. I've been saying good morning to everybody. It kind of feels like good to see everybody here this afternoon. And as we're continuing today what we started last night with Brad Harrub and our Origins, the Truth About Origins seminar. And for those who were here last night, I know we've got several that are streaming this online as well. You saw last night the need for why we're having this seminar. The whole reason of just the devastation of some of the worldly thoughts and philosophies that there are, and our need to understand that and how to combat that. And so you also saw that Brad doesn't just kind of fly by the seat of his pants with this stuff either. The research, the study, the time, the energy that he puts into all that he does is very, very obvious, and we greatly appreciate that. And so looking forward to, again, today, we've got 4 different lectures that Brad will be bringing to us throughout the day today. And the one that he is going to be doing at this 1 o'clock hour is one concerning, I guess, majority of us here, there's some who are younger, a little younger, but majority of us here were around during 1980 and the Mount St. Helens explosion. Eruption, and there's some amazing things that actually were discovered around that, and Brad is going to share that with us this afternoon. And so let's begin with a word of prayer, and I'll turn it over to Brad. Our Heavenly Father, we come to you again thanking you for another opportunity, a time that we have to be able to gather together. It's encouraging, Father, to see so many who have an interest in knowing you, knowing your truth, but also preparing themselves to know about the dangers that are in the world, the dangers that are out there that affect our families. And we pray, Father, that you will use the knowledge, the information that we gain this weekend to prepare ourselves, not just to defend ourselves, but to prepare ourselves to give an answer for the truth and for the hope that is within us. Father, we thank you for Brother Harrub, for his love for you, his love for truth, his passion to teach your word and to apply your word into all that he studies, no matter what field, what area of study that may be, seeing how your wisdom applies to everything. And Father, that is just an additional security that we have in the confidence of knowing that we can trust in you and we can trust in your word every single time. Father, we thank you again for the hope that we know lies only within you and your plan, and that plan that culminated through your Son, Jesus Christ. It's in his holy name that we pray. Amen.
Adolf Hitler once said, if you tell a big enough lie and tell it frequently enough, it will be believed. I think he was right, and I think the lie that we are discussing today is that lie of evolution. The idea that we evolved from some primordial soup. In fact, this issue of Discover asking the question, was your ancestor a sea sponge? This is your ancestor. Now, that may be theirs, but it's not mine. Those of you who were here last night, you may remember we left off with this particular slide, talking a little bit about what does the Bible say regarding how old things are, the age of the earth. And you remember we kind of walked through and we pointed out that the Bible has a genealogy from Adam all the way to Christ. And you say, okay, how does science back that up? You know, if things are relatively young, if the earth is less, say, than 10,000 years old, where's the science to prove it? Well, if I were going to prove it to you, the first place that I would go to is numbers. And the reason that I would go to numbers is because numbers cannot lie. They are unable to lie. So let's talk for just a moment about population statistics. We know, for instance, that the human population is doubling every 35 years. Now, that includes famines, diseases, wars. Every 35 years, the population doubles. So let's do this. Let's set up a little experiment. We'll say we have two people. We'll call them Adam and Eve. And we'll start back 1,000,000 years ago. Now, that's very conservative because most evolutionists would say mankind started about 3 million years ago. But let's start about 1,000,000 years ago. We'll say the average generation time, 42 years. The average family size, 2.4 children per family. Now, that's very conservative. Because some of you in this room, you can remember your grandparents, your great-grandparents having really large families. But again, we'll stay conservative, 2.4 children per family. Total population, if you do the math, there should be 10 to the 5,000th power on this earth. That's a 10 with 5,000 zeros after it. Now, I could only fit 1,000 on the screen behind me. Here's what that means. That means we need 4 more screens of zeros to represent what the population should be. Now, why is that interesting to me? That's interesting to me because right now, out of everything that the Hubble telescope has looked at, the entire known universe would only hold 10 to the 100th. I just said 10 to the 5,000th. What this is, for an area the size of a quarter, there should be 500 people. And you hope they wear deodorant, right? All right, now let's reset the experiment for a moment. What if we take two people, again we'll call them Adam and Eve, and this time we start back just 6,000 years ago. Same generation time, same size family, 2.4 children per family. We do the math. This time you come up with a number of 8.34 billion. You say, wow, Brad, that's a whole lot closer, man. That's pretty good, but still, you're too high because we know we just clicked over 7 billion. And I would look at you and say, yeah, you're right, except what happened about 4,000 years ago that knocked us back to just 8? The flood. You see, the numbers don't lie. Man-made theories might, but numbers don't. I've asked lots and lots of atheists, can you take the human population today, stretch me back 3 million years, and show me a growth pattern of how to get to the number we have today? I've yet to have an atheist do it. They can't. Somebody says, all right, but see, Brad, you still got a problem because, last night you brought out a verse. Genesis chapter 3, verse 20. Adam called his wife's name Eve because she was the mother of all living. And you mentioned that all the lineage of humanity came through this one woman, Eve. Well, if that's the case, how in the world do we explain all the different colors of people around us today? Now, let me point out to you, when I answer this question this afternoon, I'm going to be using society's definition of race, okay? That is skin color. But I believe very firmly that there is only one race, and that is the human race. And I believe that the Bible teaches very plainly and clearly that salvation is for everybody. Doesn't matter your skin color, right? So how do we explain all the different colors of people today? First thing you need to know, skin color is caused by a biological pigment known as melanin. Everybody in this room, you've got melanocyte cells. The amount of melanin in each one of those cells is actually controlled by your mom and your dad. The more melanin you have, the darker your skin. Now, geneticists have come along. They said, okay, we're going to use letters to designate how much melanin someone has in their gene pool. So, for instance, we know that this is a dominant trait. We're going to use capital letters, big A, big B, for somebody who's really, really dark-skinned. We're going to use lowercase letters, little a, little b, for somebody who's very, very fair-skinned. So is it possible for us to take two people, again, we'll call them Adam and Eve, and actually explain all the different possibilities around us today? Let's give it a try. How about this one? What if Adam and Eve were both really, really dark-skinned people? Big A, big B. What would all their children be? Really dark-skinned, right? Is that what we see around us today? Nope. So I can stand in front of you and tell you, hey, guys, Adam and Eve weren't real dark-skinned. Now, I know right now there's one or two of you sucking in breath going, he can't say that. We're living in a politically correct climate. Somebody's going to get offended. Yeah, that's all right. Y'all are all going to get offended before I'm done, so just wait your turn. How about this one? Were Adam and Eve really, really fair-skinned? Little a. What would all their children be? They'd all be fair-skinned, right? Is that what we see around us today? Nope. So even though every single summer we get a vacation packet that's got a blonde-haired, blue-eyed Eve, guess what? That's not realistic. You say, all right, what if God used one dark-skinned person and one light-skinned? On the screen behind me, you see what geneticists call a Punnett square. If you have a high school student, they will probably know what this is. Basically, we use this to predict offspring. Let me share with you how to read it. I'll go over here to the right. You've got across the top, we'll say this is Adam. You'll notice the capital letters. We'll say he was dark-skinned. Down the left-hand side, we'll say that's Eve. She was fair-skinned. So you see the lowercase letters. What you do is you take dad's genes, mom's genes, you put them together inside each one of those 16 boxes. And in this case, all 16 are right down the middle tan. Is that what we see around us today? Nope. Somebody says, Brad, you're kind of running out of options. Yeah, but I still have one left. What if God started with a mixture? In science, we call this heterozygous. Somebody who's kind of that mocha color. By the way, where did most of the events, the early events of the Bible happen? We call it the Fertile Crescent. Today, we actually refer to a lot of it as the Middle East, right? Well, what color are a lot of those people over there? Oh, yeah, they're mocha color. Okay, so if we were to take two people who have a mixture of skin color genes, what are the possibilities? Well, you can get anything from one very, very fair skin, 4 light tan, 6 tan, 4 darker brown, one very, very dark skin for a total of 16, and one very tired mother. Now, if I can get you that from just 2, how many came walking off the ark? Folks, you give me 8, and you mix in the fact that today we can get on trains, planes, automobiles, and within just a few hours be in a totally different culture. And people are now marrying between cultures. You start to see how there can be kind of a rainbow of colors around us today. And somebody says, I'm not buying it, man. I don't believe that you can get like totally different colors from the same set of parents. Well, that's good because I'm an evidence guy. That's what I do, right? So let's just talk to Cheryl Grant for a minute. She says she's got a secret. Her secret is she has a twin sister who's black. Notice it's a twin sister. And oh, by the way, she's far from being the only one. There's a lot of examples out there of children who came from the same parents and in some cases were even twins, and yet they have different genetic makeup of their skin color. So is it physically possible? Oh yeah, it's definitely possible. When somebody says, time out, hold up, Brad, man, that does not explain how you've got a predominance of dark-skinned people around the equator and light-skinned people up in Europe. Isn't that evolution? Isn't that proof that man evolved? Let me share with you what it really is. It's proof that evolution is teaching racism. And here's why I say that. You ask a high school, college student today, hey, where did man evolve from? If they've studied, they're going to tell you the continent of Africa. If they really studied, they're going to say the far region of Africa. Now, all those pictures, Homo habilis, Australopithecus afarensis, Neanderthal man, all those creatures basically are long-armed, hairy, dark-skinned creatures. Do you realize all the textbooks paint those early creatures as dark-skinned, and it's not until hundreds of thousands of years later that white man comes walking down out of Europe? I don't care how you look at it, folks. What that is teaching is that white people are further evolved than dark-skinned people. It's racism. By the way, it's exactly what Charles Darwin believed. He believed and wrote in his writings that dark-skinned people were closer to the monkeys than the white-skinned. You don't see that in the textbooks. You don't hear the mainstream media picking that up, do you? But that's what he believed. You say, all right, Brad, then how do you explain it? How do you explain the predominance of dark-skinned people around the equator? Well, let's ask ourselves this. Is there, in the Bible, is there an explanation for the dispersion of people? Like, for instance, in the book of Genesis, right after the flood, they're building this tower. You remember God had told them spread out. They decide, nope, we're going to do our own thing again. So they're building up this tower. He confuses their language, and he disperses them. Does he disperse them according to skin color or according to their language? Remember the Tower of Babel, right? So here's what I want you to do. I want you to imagine there being 1,000 people at the base of that tower, that in the blink of an eye, they're all speaking Swahili. Never spoke it before, but suddenly they are fluent in Swahili. Now, all different colors. You've got 1,000 people, different color skin tones. They all migrate down towards the equator. Who's going to fare better in that environment, closer to the sun? Dark-skinned or light-skinned people? Dark-skinned, and here's why. The more melanin you've got, the more protection you have from the sun's harmful UV rays. It actually acts as a filter. So the dark-skinned people are not going to be getting skin cancers and such. Whereas the fair-skinned people, they're going to go out, they're going to get burned, they're going to get red, they're going to get skin cancers. They're not going to fare as well in that region. Okay, let's flip it. Let's say we've got 1,000 people at the base of that tower. They all speak Swedish, all different colors. They all migrate up towards Northern Europe. Can you think of a reason why, after a few short generations, the majority of people would be speaking Swedish and would be fair-skinned? Well, let's see. That part of the world, they don't get a whole lot of sunlight. And we actually use sunlight. We need it in order to make vitamin D. Without vitamin D, you don't absorb calcium. You don't absorb calcium, guess what? You got all kinds of problems. First and foremost of which is your skeletal structure. So we actually use the sunlight. So let's say we got 1,000 people, all different colors, in an area that doesn't get a whole lot of sunlight. Who's going to fare better in that environment? I'll tell you, the dark-skinned people, that filter we just talked about, is actually going to inhibit their ability to absorb what little sunlight is available. So in that environment, being dark-skinned is actually a disadvantage. All right, where's the only place on the planet that violates this rule? Where is there a dark-skinned people that don't get a whole lot of sunlight? How about the Eskimos? And where do they get their vitamin D? From the fish, the oils, right? You see, when you stop and look at it, you realize, hey, it really does fit this book. We've just been brainwashed to think that evolution is king. You say, all right, Brad, but still, how do you prove it? How do you prove that the creation account, that God is real? All I would have to do, take you guys outside, put away the screens for a few minutes, and just start looking around at the diversity. You ever stop to just look, like within 20 feet of where you are? All the different plants, all the different little critters that are crawling around. There's a lot of diversity, right? But let's say that. Let's say I take you guys out and we stumble across this guy right here. And you look at that and you think, oh, that's a cute little frog. And I say, no, 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 no. That is a great learning opportunity. So here's what we do. We gather that frog up, bring him back into this auditorium. I bring him right down front and we put him in a blender. And I invite one of you to come up and press the on button. What would we get? We'd get frog juice, right? Now, follow me for just a moment. If I took that solution, I poured it into an airtight container, put the top on it, could I honestly say I have everything there it takes to make a frog? I mean, all the DNA, all the proteins necessary, everything necessary to make a frog right there, right? So let's say I flip that container to you. How long are you going to have to shake that up to make a frog? Or how much electricity would you have to zap it with to make a frog? Everybody in this room is thinking the same thing right now, and that is, you're not ever going to get a frog. All you're ever going to have is juice, right? Now, follow me for just a moment. I'm actually giving you a head start. Because I'm giving you everything necessary in the same location. And yet evolutionists want me to believe that there's some primordial soup, some farm pond that got hit by lightning, and lo and behold, you got frogs coming up out of there? No, I'm not buying it. Because if you guys can't make a frog with me giving you everything you need, how are you going to get something coming up out of that algae-infested farm pond? You can't. And as a result, here's what they do. Since they can't explain it, they just add more time. See, to them, time is the answer. Well, you know, given enough years, you can, according to them, man, given enough years, you can whip up a wedding cake on a beach out of the sand. A wedding cake that tastes good, by the way. Just give it enough time. It'll be there. Take a look at the last sentence on this textbook page. In a closed universe, a Big Bang may occur once every 80 to 100 billion years. Somebody help me. Where's the science with that? Because you might as well say, once upon a time. That is like a fairy tale. And yet, when I travel all over the world and I interact with young Christians, ask them questions about how they got here, what they've been taught, what their beliefs are, almost always we come back to a big bang. In their minds, they're trying to harmonize, well, maybe, God could use a big bang. And now, before I answer the question on the screen right there, I want to take just a moment or two of your time and talk to you about the science side of the Big Bang. Because in all reality, it's miserable science. Do those textbooks actually tell you where the matter for that Big Bang came from? Answer, nope. In fact, some of you, you've heard me share this story. I was having a Bible study with a guy at a coffee shop in our hometown of Franklin. And the guy was an atheist. Actually, he was a really nice guy. We were sitting there studying. By the way, you know what an atheist looks like? He looks like you and I. They don't have like horns and a black cape, right? So we're sitting there, and I looked at him and I said, help me understand, like, your worldview. Where did everything come from if there really is no God? Here's what he said. Brad, clear your mind of everything. I said, all right. He said, that's it. That's what was here before the Big Bang. He said, it was like a vacuum in space. He said, there was literally nothing there. Then what went bang? Looks at me across the table and says, well, the nothing went bang. I said, time out, hold up. You expect me to believe that there was literally nothing, like zero, and then some random day, Tuesday at 12:37, that nothing decided to go, and we got all this stuff. He said, uh-huh. I said, buddy, I don't have enough faith to be an atheist. Because that requires a whole lot more faith than believing in God. I mean, when you think about it for just a moment, here is their answer to where everything came from. They shrink it down to what they call a point of singularity, a little dot out in space. In fact, this issue of Discover, asking the question, where did everything come from? According to them, that red dot you see right there in the middle, that's the actual size of the universe at 10 to the minus 34 seconds before the Big Bang. In fact, let me blow up the subheading down here at the bottom for you. It says, the universe burst into something from absolutely nothing. Zero, nada. As it got bigger, it became filled with even more stuff that came from absolutely nowhere. Now, does that sound scientific to anybody in this room? I mean, literally, they are just throwing this thing together. Hodgepodge, by the way, that right there is actually more miraculous than the creation account. He goes on to say, how's that possible? Ask Alan Guth. His theory of inflation helps explain everything. All right, well, let's ask Alan Guth. Alan Guth, an astrophysicist, gave an interview in Omni magazine several years ago. They asked him that very question. They said, how big was this very early pre-inflation or pre-Big Bang universe? Take a look at his answer. He says, amazingly small, about 10 to the minus 24 centimeters across. Smaller, he says, than a proton. Also amazing, it would have contained only about 25 pounds of matter. What's my next question? Where'd your 25 pounds come from? See, he didn't explain the existence of the universe. What he did, he shrank it down to 25 pounds. He blew some smoke in your face, hoping you didn't see through that. He doesn't have an answer. By the way, let's just use the brains God gave us for a minute, right now. Is it logical to conclude that everything in this room came from 25 pounds? I mean, let's be honest. There's some of us in this room, we could lose 24. But anyway. Is it logical to conclude that everything in Arkansas, every rock, every piece of asphalt, every drop of water came from 25 pounds? Not just Arkansas, all of the United States. Not just the United States, the entire planet. By the way, we know water has weight, right? About 9 pounds a gallon. Is it logical to conclude that every drop of water on this planet, everything came from just 25 pounds? But not just the earth. What about our whole solar system? Or the entire universe? You see, I fear sometimes that our kids are reading textbooks and they are swallowing this stuff hook, line, and sinker without even stopping to think, hey, that makes 0 sense right there. That's stupid. To say that everything came from 25 pounds? How in the world do you get an ordered universe from nothing when we all know that an explosion, an expansion, results in chaos? Anybody in this room that's ever dealt with dynamite, or maybe you've worked at a construction site, maybe you've just driven by one on the side of the interstate. You know, when they blow up part of a mountainside, those rocks don't come off in beautiful, perfect circles, do they? No, they're all jagged and messed up, and the whole place looks rough. And yet I'm supposed to believe there was this massive explosion that would make Hiroshima look like child's play, right? And yet from that chaotic explosion, we got an ordered universe. How do they explain that? Let a guy by the name of Paul Davies give you his explanation. Take a listen. This is an evolutionist trying to explain how their theory violates all these laws of science. Here's what he says. The Big Bang represents the instantaneous suspension of physical laws, the sudden abrupt flash of lawlessness that allowed something to come out of nothing. He said it represents a true miracle. Now, my question would be, why is that more scientific than saying, in the beginning, God did it? Let's get back to that question. Could God use a Big Bang to get us where we are today? First and foremost, Big Bang is miserable science. Listen to what Bob Berman was saying about it to his fellow astronomers. He suggested we start putting a warning before every scientific article that talked about the Big Bang. He says, warning, the following contains contemporary cosmology. Reading it can produce disorientation and confusion. Nobody knows what's going on here, and nothing you read here is likely to be true. Now, that is one astronomer writing to his fellow astronomers. How do we present it in textbooks? As fact. Is that how we got here? In the beginning, God created. Was that maybe God used the Big Bang to get us here? If you have a Bible, let me encourage you, open it up. First 2 verses of the Bible. Genesis chapter 1, verses 1 and 2. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was without form and void. Darkness was upon the face of the deep. And the Spirit of God moved upon the surface of the waters. How does Moses describe the earth on that very first day? Well, let me ask you, what was the Spirit of God moving over? It was waters, right? And we don't often think about it this way, but on that first day, this was a water-covered heavenly body. God hadn't brought forth land yet. Okay. Do we know the boiling temperature of water? Scientifically, it's either 100 degrees or 212, depending on which system you use, right? At that temperature, water turns to steam. Okay, follow me. The alleged Big Bang took place at a temperature you and I can't fathom. in the millions of degrees. How do you go from a 1,000,000-degree explosion to having a water-covered heavenly body on the same day? Fact is, you can't. Now, you add to that, according to Scripture, the sun, the moon, the stars, they didn't come into the picture until day 4. So follow me for just a minute. Those of you in this room that believe that the Bible is inspired, the Bible says there were plants on this earth before there was ever anything else out there. Now, if you can squeeze that into a big bang, I'd love to hear how you do it. In fact, the Bible says this: water first, then land. Evolution says, no. There were these floating hot bodies of land that eventually cooled down, and then we got water. Okay, where'd they get their water from? I mean, think about it. Everybody in this room knows you've got to have water for life, right? Where'd it come from? I know where water came from. According to the Bible, God created it on the first day. But how does an evolutionist explain the existence of water? I had a professor one time heckling me. He's sitting right over to my right. I heard him. He spoke. He's like, that'd be the water cycle. I was like, yeah, nice try, Sparky, but in order to have a water cycle, you first have to have what? You got to have water. How do they explain it? You'll be happy to know. 2009, just a few short years ago, they finally decided all the water on this planet was delivered by meteorites. Now, a couple of problems with that. Number one, I didn't know scientifically that meteorites were in the water delivery business. Problem number two, what happens when a meteorite hits our atmosphere? It burns. What would happen to the water? Folks, they can't even explain water. And yet they're trying to present this stuff as a fact. The problem is, by the time your kid hits 13, 14, they've already adopted millions or billions of years in their mind because of things like this, the geologic column. All those different layers, the Triassic, the Jurassic, Cambrian. I had a young man one time, we were talking about it. I said, so have you learned the geologic column? He named it literally, top to bottom. He said, yes, sir, I've been tested on it. I said, well, did they tell you how they actually came up with this geologic column? He kind of looked at me funny. He said, no, they didn't tell us that. I said, I didn't think so. Because the geologic column was actually fashioned in the 1800s based almost solely on assumptions. We didn't know anything about how fast canyons were formed or stridal layers were made. 39 years ago, all of our assumptions were blown away in just a matter of a couple of days. We learned more about geology in a week than we had learned the previous 100 years. 39 years ago, Mount St. Helens erupted. For those of y'all sitting out there going, was it really 39? Yes, you are that old, okay? When it erupted, here's what happened. The mountain itself was actually growing in girth about 35 feet a day the week before it erupted. I tell young people, it's like a big zit just waiting to erupt, okay? So imagine, if you will, I take a bottle of Coke, I shake that Coke as much as I can, I flip it up to you, and I ask you to open it up. What's going to happen? It's going to shoot out all over the place, right? Basically, the same thing happened with Mount St. Helens. The north face of Mount St. Helens slid off, and it was just like taking that top off of a Coke. All of a sudden, all the pressure, all the steam, all the heat was released, and in just a matter of minutes, that mountain was reduced to rubble. My son and I, Will, we were there. Yeah, that's Will, by the way, for those of y'all who saw him last night. He was a little bit smaller back then. We were there on the 30th anniversary of Mount St. Helens eruption. And what I want to do before I let you guys take a break is I want to share with you 5 things that we learned from Mount St. Helens that point directly to a very young earth. 5 things that support a biblical timeline using the acronym SUPER. S-U-P-E-R. 5 things that I hope you'll remember. Number 1 is that S, those striatal layers. I think everybody in this room has probably seen the layering effect of rocks, maybe driving down the interstate. It doesn't take much. You see it all over the place, just like this one here. That rock bluff that you're looking at on the screen is about 120 feet tall. And the reason that I know that, Will and I actually stood at the base of that, filmed a little portion of a DVD. Now, evolutionists would say that the rock up there on the top, they call that sedimentary rock. They say it's over 100 million years old. The only problem with that is everything you're looking at was laid down 39 years ago in a matter of just a couple of days. In fact, if you're in this room and you're over the age of 39, I can look at you and say, you're as old as a rock, and mean it. In fact, we've got video proof of it throughout Mount St. Helens. If you look at this slide, everything below that bottom yellow line was put down in the initial eruption, May the 18th, 1980. There was a secondary eruption, June the 20th, 1980, that put all the layers in the middle. Now, I asked a guy while we were out there, I said, how do you get that layering effect? He said, well, Brad, have you ever swept a broom across like a tile floor? I said, yeah. He said, you know how it always leaves just a little bit of a fine layer of dirt you kind of got to go back and sweep up again? I said, yeah. He said, that's exactly what happens. Lava comes across. It leaves a layer, and before all of it moves on, you've got another wave coming right behind it, and it's leaving these fine layers. March the 19th, 1982, there was another secondary eruption. It had formed a new dome cap. That dome cap blew, put everything above that top yellow line. Here's my point. Everything you're looking at on the screen was put down in just 2 years. Not 2,000, not 2 million, just 2. So as a scientist, do I think it takes millions of years to make these layers, and those striatal layers as we call them? Nope. Mount St. Helens has shown us you can do this very quickly. So the S is for those striatal layers, the rapid layers. The U is for upright logs. On the north side of Mount St. Helens, there's a lake called Spirit Lake. And when the volcano erupted, here's what happened. All the trees on the closest ridge of mountains around it, immediately they lost their branches, and the force of that volcano basically shoved the trunks down into Spirit Lake. It formed this massive floating mat. In fact, a buddy of mine by the name of Dr. Steve Austin has done extensive research there. If you look at the very bottom of the screen, you'll see Steve with one of his colleagues in scuba gear. He told me, he said, Brad, what's happening is these logs are floating for decades. And he said, finally, after decades, the heavy root end will sink down. He said, they just bob standing straight up and down. Now, Will and I saw several of them doing just that while we were there. He said after several more years, here's what happens. They finally sink down into the bottom of Spirit Lake, standing straight up and down. In fact, he sent me some video of fish swimming between trees. It was kind of cool looking. He said, Brad, this is what's happening at Spirit Lake because of a catastrophe. Every few years you get a secondary explosion, more sediment settles down onto them. He said they're being fossilized standing straight up and down just like this. Now, that's what we see as a result of a catastrophe at Mount St. Helens, and it's also what we see in the fossil record. If you look at the screen, you'll notice at the bottom of the picture there are 3 men standing right over here, but you'll also notice there's 5 fossilized trees. But I want you to notice those trees go through several different layers, don't they? How do you get a tree, for instance, right here, starting in what they're calling the Carboniferous period that grows up through the Triassic period? According to their time scale, that's over 150 million years. I mean, if you're a dead tree, right, are you going to just stick around for 150 million years, or would you decay and rot? Now, it'd be one thing if I only had one picture to show you. But folks, we've got these things quite literally all across the globe. My family and I were in Nova Scotia not too long ago. Again, what do we see? Fossils that are going through several different layers. How do you get trees, for instance, passing through what they call sedimentary rock? And again, it's all over the place. This one's in Troy, Alabama. This one's in Cookeville. Again, trees that pass through several different layers. How do you get that? If their geologic column is true, you shouldn't have fossils going through several different layers. But we do. Which, by the way, these by themselves pretty much demolish the whole geologic column. So the U is for upright logs. The P is for peat formation. So while we were there, we took a ride into Mount St. Helens, looked around a little bit, did some aerial photography. And one of the things that you can see very clearly when you're up there is the log mat in Spirit Lake. This is a picture of it. 30 years afterwards, it's still there, still floating. But if you took the helicopter down or if you hiked out to that log mat, one of the very first things you'll notice is there's not a stitch of bark on any of those logs. The reason being, they've been bumping together for 30 years out on the top of that lake. All the bark is now in the bottom of the lake. In fact, my buddy Steve Austin told me, he said, Brad, what's happened is the bark has formed these peat mines down in the bottom of the lake, massive amounts of peat. He said, we have actual peat beds 15, 20 feet deep. Now you look at me and you say, so what, who cares? Peat is a precursor for making coal. They're actually making coal in the bottom of this lake during our lifetime. Is that a big deal? That's a huge deal. Because right now textbooks are telling our kids that all the coal was laid down during the Carboniferous period 250 million years ago. And yet we're making coal in the bottom of this lake during our life. How in the world is that happening? Well, let's see. In order to make coal, you got to have a lot of vegetation, compacted down, say a lot of peat. But you also have to have lots of pressure, which the water weighs quite a bit. And you got to have heat from, say, a volcano. We're actually making coal, even though I was taught in my biology classes, it takes millions of years to make coal. So the P is for peat formation. The E is for eroding canyons. Rapidly eroding canyons. If I didn't tell you anything at all about the image on the screen behind me, other than the fact that those canyons are about 600 feet deep, you might think that little river going right through the middle of it, that's what carved out the canyon? Because that's what we're often told, right? You know, rivers carve out canyons. That river didn't have anything to do with that canyon. The reason I know that, when you first go into the black Mount St. Helens, one of the very first things you'll notice is it did not erupt straight up. It actually also came out. It blew literally the side of the mountain off. Remember I told you it was growing about 35 feet a day? So the week before it actually erupted, here's what happened. All the snow and the ice on that sector that you're looking at right here slid down into the valley. And then it went boom. What do you think happens to snow and ice when it comes in contact with, say, lava? It's going to melt real quick and turn into steam. And that steam actually blew canyon vents 600 feet deep in just 2 days. Not 2 weeks, not 2 years, not 2 billion years, just 2 days. Now, folks, think about that for just a moment. 600 feet canyons in 2 days. And yet, what are we told? Millions of years, the Colorado River carved out the Grand Canyon from solid rock. Let me just see a show of hands. How many of you in this room remember being taught that the Colorado River carved out the Grand Canyon? Okay, we're going to learn something. Here's what we know for sure, okay? We know that the Grand Canyon exists. That's a scientific fact, right? But there's two different interpretations. You got evolutionists who say it was formed slowly, millions of years, by a little bit of water, long period of time. Creationists, though, we look at it and we say, wait, time out. Hold up. We have a living laboratory at Mount St. Helens that has shown us you can do this really quickly with a large volume of water over a short amount of time. The problem is evolutionists are trying to erase the line between their interpretation and what is fact. And so most of the textbooks will read something like this. Colorado River is cut through layer upon layer of rock over millions of years. Well, folks, I can look every single one of you in the face and tell you, that river, it didn't carve that canyon. And the reason I know that for a fact, if you look at the screen for just a moment, on the top right, you'll notice it says the river enters the canyon right over here by the Navajo Indian Reservation, elevation of 2,800 feet. It's a scientific fact. You can't refute it. If you don't trust me, take a GPS, go right over there to the Navajo Indian Reservation. You're going to be at an elevation of 2,800 feet. Now, the south rim, the part where everybody loves to look out and see the handiwork of God, is sitting right over here at an elevation of 6,900 feet. What that means is, in order for that river to have carved that canyon, water would have had to have flowed uphill over 4,000 feet in elevation. Now, I grant you, I'm not a geologist, but I do know water seeks the lowest level, right? That river didn't carve that canyon. In fact, if it carved the canyon, where's all the stuff that was in the canyon? Where's the delta, right? Or why are there so many side canyons? You say, all right, Brad, do you have a better explanation? All right, what about this? What if there was, say, a mid-continental lake and it breached a dam? Would that carve out something like that real quickly? Or how about this? Would a global flood do it? Yeah, that would do it. So the E is for rapidly eroding canyons. The R is for rapid recovery. I took this picture about, probably 5-10 minutes, our very first day into the blast zone. And as you can see, stuff is back. You know, when Mount St. Helens first erupted, scientists were quick to tell us it's going to be 60,000 years before it returns. And then they self-corrected and they said 30,000. Yeah, okay, well that's 30 years to the day. And it's back. In fact, elk were some of the first creatures to come back into the blast zone. Elk have very, very tough hooves. And what they discovered was the elk were going across those pyroclastic flows, the hardened lava flows, and they were breaking off pieces. And then elk do what elk do. They fertilized. And that brought in more plants and animals. And all of a sudden, it's back. See, they were basing everything on an evolutionary assumption that it takes long periods of time. Those of you who, it really did look like a war zone. When it went off, I mean, it took out everything. Ash blew 4 states away. Some of you in this room, you probably remember it. In fact, some of you may have some in a little vial today. Those of you who are living, you probably remember there was a guy who owned a general store right beside the mountain. And they told him, they said, you need to evacuate, you need to get out. And he looked the camera in the eye and said, oh, my granddaddy started this store, he didn't ever leave, my daddy never left, I ain't leaving either. Well, he didn't. And he didn't make it. He's still there, at least whatever's left of him. Now, as you look at that picture, think about this for just a minute. This is a total blank slate to test the evolutionary theory, right? Because there's nothing living, no plants, no animals. So surely if evolution is true, we're going to get like new stuff growing, right? Or we're going to get plants that evolve into something else. Everything there, we've already classified. Now here's the interesting part to me. You can take your child, your grandchild, to Mount St. Helens and within 2 days show them everything we just talked about as a fact. And yet their textbooks will not cover it. Why? What's the one thing they got to have lots and lots and lots of for their theory? Time. In fact, take a look at this is a teacher's edition, okay? Notice what I highlighted in this textbook. Stress that the earth is thought to be at least 4.5 billion years old. Well, why in the world would I stress that? Because without lots and lots of time, you don't get this thing off the ground. You say, oh, well, do you have any examples that maybe this whole dating thing is wrong? Well, that's a hammer. The problem is that hammer is in rock that it shouldn't be in. And by that I mean this. The rock, they say, is 400 million years old. Now, let me just kind of give you a real quick lowdown on that. They'd say we only been here 3 to 5 million years. So that means like the dinosaurs' early ancestors were using hammers, according to their theory. Or how about something like that? Hopefully you can see clear enough to realize there's like gears in that. And what in the world, what kind of, oh, that's a clock. Why is that a big deal? Yeah, because that clock is actually in fossilized rock that, according to them, is hundreds of millions of years old. Now, folks, think about that for just a minute. How do you get a clock in something that's supposedly hundreds of millions of years old when people weren't around back then, supposedly? And yet, we got example after example after example. You look at coal. We just talked about being made in the bottom of Spirit Lake. They tell us, oh, it takes lots of time, lots of vegetation. We know it doesn't take a lot of time. We've proven that. In fact, in a laboratory setting, they can do it now in a matter of months. And don't expect them to heat your house with it yet, because it takes a lot of energy to put it under that much pressure, right? But here's the point. We're finding stuff in coal that shouldn't be there. Because according to them, coal was laid down 250 million years ago, yet we got this bell right here that was found in a lump of coal. So how in the world, I mean, like on their timeline, it's before the dinosaurs. I told some people, I guess that's like when they rang the dinner bell for the dinosaurs to come eat. I don't know. But you know, I got a little bit better answer for you. Because the Bible actually talks about people smelting metal and making musical instruments even before Noah. So do I think that people actually had the ability to? Oh, yeah. We're going to talk a little bit more about what were early men like, but I want to make sure you leave this session with the understanding when God created man, we weren't ignorant. Somebody says, wait, what about cavemen? Folks, we have people living in caves today, okay? Doesn't mean they're ignorant. In fact, the fact that they can get out from under the rain probably says something about them. But just because they're using a facility that they have and they're not building a brick house structure doesn't mean that they're ignorant. Do I think that the earth is old? Not nearly as old as they want you to think. You got gold chains being reported in coal. You got this iron pot that was found in Thomas, Oklahoma. You got brass vessels. You got little dolls. All these kinds of things, again, over and over, found in things that should be older than mankind. And yet, guess what? It's real evidence. So, what's the draw? What's the bottom line? Do you remember the first slide I showed you? Adolf Hitler said, if you tell a big enough lie and tell it frequently enough, it will be believed. Some of the stuff I've showed you today, some of you had never seen. And the reason you hadn't seen it is because they didn't want you to see it. It doesn't fit the worldview that they're trying to convince us of. A worldview, by the way, that goes against this book right here. So, let me ask you this. Brad, do you think there were dinosaurs on the ark? To find out, you're going to have to come back in about 20 minutes. We're going to take a short break. Let you guys get up, stretch your legs. Restrooms are both directions probably, maybe. I'll be around. We are going to have a question and answer session before we eat. So if you've got questions, please hold on to them. But this will be some time for you just to kind of get up. If you're one of those people who doesn't like talking in front of people and you're just dying to know something, I'll be right down here. You can come ask me. But other than that, you're free for about 20 minutes. Thank you.